So do you broadcast this? You record it and broadcast it later, or edit it, or what do you do, or just send it on out live and raw?
Doing both actually. So I'm going to do the video live starting pretty much right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so it'll be on YouTube where everybody will see it, and then I edit together the audio as part of the audio version of the podcast. So
Very
it's a
cool.
little bit of both. So people watching the video, they're seeing this little chat right now. But then people who hear the audio, they're going to hear the song, and then it's going to fade down, and then it's going to sound all professional when I say, "Welcome to the Bladtcast." Joining me now, guitarist, singer, songwriter Brian Ray has a great new song, which our audio listeners just heard a little of, called "Got a New Thing," out now from Wicked Cool Records. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks so much, Christian. It's a pleasure to be here, man.
Yeah, it's fun. And look, we were talking before we got started. That is a fantastic hat. And for people watching, I want to make sure that they see it. I'll make sure there's a little thumbnail for people who are only hearing the audio. But let's get right into "Got a New Thing." I was reading some notes about it. First of all, I think it's a great song. I listened to it several times. That's the best thing about interviewing a musician. The best way to do your research is just close your eyes and listen a few times. I read some other stuff too, but that the best part is just listening to the music. And so you talked a little bit about what the song means, but I thought instead of me quoting what you said, it might be more interesting if I let you just kind of talk about where the idea for the song came from.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, first of all, I'm not doing protest music as much as
Sure.
I am just an American man who has something to say every once in a while. Otherwise, I'm talking about women in cars, like any of
Sure.
us.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, something comes along that grabs my attention, I think deserves to be amplified with whatever sort of amplification I can offer up. In this case, my new single, "Got a New Thing," on Wicked Cool Records. It's really, for me, it's a song for and about the survivors and victims of sexual abuse, and victims and survivors of coercion in cults, myriad cults all over the world. And it's hard to rock out when you're writing about such a tender subject as that.
Sure. Yeah.
But I figured out if I could write about it as these women, mostly women, are now seeing their perpetrator walked away in handcuffs, and these women finally have a new life in front of them, and as a result of being heard and being understood. So that's the song, "Got a New Thing."
Well, it's interesting, obviously, because it's obviously, a subject worth talking about. But when you talk about cults, I think, in recent years, the idea of what a cult is has changed so much. I mean, people used to think of, Jonestown and, and all of that. But now it's, there earlier this year, there was this HBO miniseries about that Nexium cult, and, how that just kind of starts as like a self-help business, and then you blink and all of a sudden you're like in really deep in a cult, and it really, it's not the, people getting, not that it doesn't happen, but it's, the idea of a cult was probably like, somebody gets, taken away in a van somewhere. And next thing you know, you're, I don't know, you're just seeing the world completely different. But this idea that it's like, oh, these are people who are doing good things. And before you know it, it's, you don't even know what you're into. And that, I mean, that's a case that is just, it's still ongoing, and that's probably the most high profile thing. But I think because of a show like that, people definitely think differently about cults. I know I do, and you can realize like, oh yeah, people who are like, oh, I'm too smart to ever have anything like that happen. And it really, there's nothing dumb about it. It's just the way that people try to sort of engineer that kind of existence. And so I think it's a, you're right. It's not I saw her standing there to refer to someone that we'll talk about in a little bit. But I think it's important to talk about. And the song is still catchy. I mean, it's not, look, there are songs that have an important message. I mean, it comes immediately to mind. Suzanne Vega had that great song about child abuse called Luca. You
Yeah.
kind of knew that was a serious song when you heard it, you
Yes,
know? And
exactly.
I think that, it's all important to talk about, but when you're focusing on they got a new thing, the idea, the song I know references the orange jumpsuit, this idea of, you see that person going away in handcuffs, and
Yeah.
you always feel that, you can at least be like, this is terrible that people have had to go through this. At least
Yeah.
there's some degree of satisfaction at the end of it all, because I'm sure too many times it happens that the person's never found, guilty, all that. So I think I can appreciate the fact that it is an upbeat song, because you're able to find, really the sort of the best part of it, the way to move on from it, and how important that can be.
You have a good point. I mean, the truth is that most people coerced into being in a cult don't realize that they're being coerced in a cult. It starts out as a self-help thing, as was the case with this Nexium thing. So yeah, it's not I saw her standing there. It's more like I saw him standing there in her orange jumpsuit
Yeah.
in handcuffs.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's there's another whole series on the Nexium cult that's told from the point of view of the victims. And
Right.
that's what really caught my eye. The first series is told from one of his male cohorts, as he's trying to find the truth, this Mark guy. I'm not
Yes.
going to come down heavy on it, but
No, I mean, he does come around. So there, I mean, you can question sort of where he is up into a point, but at least he, because I guess they talk about people who try to sound the alarm for this guy, Keith Raniere, and they're like, no, 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 you're just seeing it wrong. And at least this is a guy who listened. But yeah, I think to say that he's without blame would be dishonest.
yeah, I think so. But we'll wait for that justice to be met.
Sure.
In any case, I mean, not to spend all our time talking about Keith Raniere, but check it out. There's a second series told from the victim's point of view. I think it's called Seduced or
Yeah.
Seduction. I'm not sure what it is. I'm sorry for not knowing that. I think it's on Stars. Anyway, it's really well worth seeing because it might have been done better than the first one, and it's a more well told story, and it really brings you in to that very thing you talked about. Like, people don't think they're joining a cult. They start out. He started out as a pyramid scheme, multi-level marketing scheme, and it grew into this Nexium thing. And he was lauded as the next big thing by a lot of big wigs in industry. So, hey, you got to pay attention, man. Things can turn bad fast, as his did.
Yeah, and I did a quick search. It's called Seduced Inside the Nexium Cult, and that is indeed from Stars. And yeah, I think I knew that there was another series, but I didn't actually realize what the difference was. It was like how we had multiple documentaries about that Fire Fest, a year ago, which, it was like, well, which one do you have? Do you have Netflix? Do you have Hulu? Then that's the one you're going to watch. But that's
Yeah.
interesting, and I don't know how many hours I can devote to this story, but it is fascinating. And it's the cult of right now. I mean, obviously you have some cults that stand out from, obviously, I already referenced Jonestown, but I mean, I remember like 20 some odd years ago, there you had the Hell Bop people with like, they all had the Reeboks on, and it's, and you hear about it and you're like, oh, that's so crazy. How does anybody fall for it? But like we're talking about, it's like, there's nothing to fall for. It's just talking to people. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this seems like it makes sense, and it's, I don't know. I think it's there's not enough rock songs about cults. So I think I'm glad that there's another one,
Well, there's a band about cults. It's called Cult.
Yeah,
But
there's the cult, yeah, with Ian Astbury is his name, I believe.
exactly.
Right?
Well, in any case, man, I think it just to put a bow on this thing, human nature is such that we're looking for something out there to help us in here. I mean, it's just who we are. We do that with religion. We do that with politics. We do that with vintage cars or vintage guitars. You know, we look for it in pop, in rock, in film, in our stars. It's just that cults are a little bit more insidious. Anyway, let's talk about music.
Let's talk about the music for the song, because reading about it, you have from one of my favorite bands, you have Scott Schreiner from Weezer on bass and background vocals, and we'll talk about your, I don't know if you want to call it your day job, your side gig, but anybody that's seen Paul McCartney in recent years should know Abe, because he is a very imposing figure. He is an amazing drummer. You both play with Paul McCartney, and I saw Sir Paul at Dodger Stadium not long ago, but I didn't go to the one that Ringo was at. But I've seen video of that. So I see Abe at a drum kit, Ringo at another drum kit. And I was like, oh, so that's the show that I skipped. Yeah, I wouldn't have enjoyed that at all, you know?
You don't need to see all of that, you know, just the only two surviving Beatles. Don't worry. It's there's YouTube.
That'll happen again at some point. But so talk about sort of putting the song together and, you know, the different collaborators, how it all came about.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christian. I mean, this started out in around February. I started writing the song. And every song starts with a different impetus, whether it's the lyric, you got a catchy lyric or a title or a beat or a riff. In the case of Got a New Thing, my new single, it started with the guitar lick. Dow, 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 dow. It started there. Then it grew to the verse chords, which I just pulled out of the lick. They're the chords that would go under the lick if the lick had chords. And then I wrote a chorus, and then I rewrote the chorus. The chorus was a very different, wordy kind of thing, and it was called Sayonara Baby. That's the way the chorus ended up. And I thought, okay, this is really cool, but I think I want to try another approach. I just allowed myself to rewrite it. And sometimes good stuff is rewritten. It's not just written. And that was the case here. And I made a more broad brush, kind of a bigger chorus with fewer words and a big emotion, one turn of phrase, emptying into a big sort of a cappella vocal wall. And then I decided that a cappella vocal wall would be a great way to start the song too. And then it was about writing the lyrics and finding that reason for the lyrics that we were talking about.
Sure.
And then it was about calling the guys I had in mind, like Scott Schreiner from Weezer, amazing bass player, really good buddy, and an astounding singer. Then these two had worked together with me on my first solo album. I think maybe my second one as well. Then I called Abe Laboriel Jr., my brother from another mother. And we started years ago in France playing with some French stars way before Paul.
Yeah.
I mean, so Abe is the guy who's responsible for me hooking up with Paul 20 years ago. Anyway, so Abe kindly said yes, but he said, but I'm in a getaway in my little house in New York. And I don't have my righteous studio here. And I went, oh gosh. And I'm not flying around because it's COVID. I went,
yeah, sure, of course.
And he goes, but wait, let me call my drum company and see if they'll send me a drum kit. And let me look around and see if I can put together enough mics to do this. And in a day, he got back to me, he says, I got a kit on the way. I've got my mic set up. It's not my most ideal studio, but I can do it. And I was like, holy moly. Then he did it in one take because he's Abe Laboriel Jr. And then Scott Schreiner was over here, actually before Abe did his drums, played bass in my house. He's here in LA. Came to my house, did a little distance session. And he sang out in the hall and I was here in the studio. And I was masked up, as was Jose. And he played two passes on bass and that was it. And then he sang all of his parts one after another. We sent all that stuff to Abe and Abe just doubled him. So I think there's 6 Scott Shriners singing that intro. Wow. And there's 6 Abe Laboriel Juniors singing the intro. So there's literally 12 voices going on when you hear the record start. That's both of them singing a lot, and then I come in with the lead.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. I listened enough that I was trying to pick out voices, but I didn't realize I was picking out the same voice, 6 times as it were. And look, I've talked to a lot of musicians over these last few months, and the way that you're talking about this is the way that a lot of it happens. I mean, in a lot of cases, people weren't even thinking about recording anything, but then it's like, oh, what do you think about this? And, everybody's able to just do their stuff remotely. I mean, there's the way you're talking about in the hallway, distance wise, but also it's you can send the drum tracks from anywhere. So there's no reason not to do it. And, it really opens up who you're able to collaborate with. It's not like, all right, I've got the studio for, 4 hours on Sunset on a Tuesday afternoon. So who's willing to drive over from the Valley, so it's great to be able to, get those kind of collaborations. And I think that I don't know, that must be freeing for you that you don't have to think about like who's in town right now. It's more like, oh, who do I think would be the best for this? Let's see what they're up to right now.
That's right. And to be clear, I started the track here. So the song, I would say I say this a lot, it marinated in my imagination for quite a while as I was writing it. And something really strange happens with me. I don't know if you've ever heard anything like this. It's weird. It's like kind of some strange little thing that happens. I start to hear the final record in my head before I've recorded one thing.
Wow.
So I hear sort of like the arrangement, the density of it, what instruments are in it, what instruments aren't in it, the total sound of it, the sound of the vocal, and I start picturing the whole thing. But that process takes a little while. It comes to me in sort of bits and pieces. And then it falls together around the time when I'm supposed to record it. And then when that happens, then it's sort of more mechanical, like I'll put down rough drums here on my computer, right here in my studio, Bad Manners here, Manors. Then I'll put in, a rough guitar, like a single guitar. Then I'll do the bass, a rough bass. And then I'll do a rough vocal, and I'll send that to the guys to get them to learn it. And you build from there. When all is said and done, it took me one day to record everything, but it took me months to sort of marinate the whole thing. Does that make sense? It's weird.
No, it absolutely does. It's, as someone who appreciates listening to music, I love the idea. I don't think I would ever be able to synthesize it in my head. Like I couldn't even come up with a bad demo in my head, much less a finished record. But I love the idea of it working that way. And, it's definitely, you hear about, talented musicians who, never really learn how to read music or anything. They're like, yeah, I could hear it in my head. There you go. Brian Ray right there, and it's just like, because who's really going to sit down and teach Eddie Van Halen how to do what he did? It's like, oh yeah, I kind of want to try to make a sound like this. And it's like, well, nobody else can do that,
Yeah.
And he couldn't even teach his son Wolfgang how to do it, because it's all up there. And if it's not up there, you're not going to be able to recreate it. So I think that's an interesting way to imagine it. And so the song in your head, just as good as what the finished product was, or did you have any trouble getting it to be what you wanted it to be?
It actually sounds better than what I had in my head, because I can't really paint with the great enough detail that will give me Abe Laboriel singing in his superfluous way, or Scott Schreiner nailing the bass that I put a rough version down, but then he takes it like 20% better. And then he sounds like a god because he's a god, so you can't actually come close in your mind. You can hope.
You sure?
You just sort of shoot for good, and then your friends make it better.
When sort of talking about all this different instrumentation, I thought it was interesting when I was reading about when you're out on the road with Sir Paul McCartney, you play guitar, backing vocals, and you'll pick up the bass when he picks up a guitar or he goes over to the piano. So I can imagine that's, I was talking about the nice hat before. I'm sure, wearing that many hats at this point isn't that hard for you. It's probably why you said you've been with him for 20 years, you and Abe. I assume it's largely the same musicians. I think when somebody like Paul McCartney knows, oh, I can count on these people. I was going to say these guys, but that's not always the case, that it's just guys in anybody's band. So he gets to a point where he can count on them. And I think that's probably why it's like, oh yeah, go over there and pick up the bass. I'm decided I'm going to do this now. So that has to be kind of great to have that kind of collaboration, somebody that trusts you for 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, it says more about him than any of us. I mean, he's a trusting, big-spirited genius. Okay, so let's just clarify, he's a genius. And but he's also a good human, and he's not looking for karaoke. He doesn't want us to duplicate the record like perfectly. Yeah. He's living in real time, playing these songs. He's playing this music as it feels to him today. And he might play the piano a little different every night on a certain song, or he'll add this little ad lib, or he'll riff out on guitar much longer than usual. But we've all got to be there to follow him and to support him. And he trusts us. So yeah, it's an amazing thing that he trusts us.
And obviously, before you have that opportunity, I'm sure, just reading there'd been plenty of success and great opportunities in your career before that. But when you have that first opportunity, I don't know, the first time you play with him, I'm just sort of wondering, is there that moment of like, all right, I know that this is a Beatle, but I have to calm down a little bit because, he's just a guy like everybody else. And I just have to do what I'm here for a reason,
Absolutely. You forget that last part. I'm here for a reason. All you're struck with is, oh my God, I won't look at him, because if I look at him, then I'll screw up. So for the first 6 months of my touring with him, to say nothing of the first 6 days of rehearsing with him, once we got out there and played, I just said, don't look at him. Just look down. You got a lot to do, Brian. Don't fuck it up. Don't fuck it up.
Yeah.
So, you just sort of do your very best to keep your eye on the ball and don't fumble the ball.
In Spinal Tap, when they put the piece of tape on the floor that says Cleveland, you basically have a piece of tape that says, "Don't fuck it up, Brian."
Yeah. Don't look.
So it's I don't know, that's got to be a tremendous opportunity. And I want to talk about your other song that you have out right now in a moment, but just one last thing about Paul. I mean, I saw him, it was a few years ago, and I don't know how old he is, 75, and just it was like almost a 3-hour show, and I've seen guys that are literally half his age that they have trouble doing 90 minutes. And you're like, I mean, I guess it was a good concert, but really 75 minutes, like what was that? And it was just like, and when you're Paul McCartney and you have the Beatles songs, you have the Wings songs, you have all this stuff, you have the solo songs, and then you're there in the moment and you're like, oh my God, he played everything. And then the drive home, you're like, well, there's like 4 or 5 more that he must have run out of time for, and it's so crazy, I mean, and to think about, the funny thing is, like, to think about seeing him at Dodger Stadium. I think with like the next year, I also saw Guns N' Roses at Dodger Stadium, and both bands, of course, do Live and Let Die. And so I can think about, like, both of them. It's almost like they were trying to outdo each other with the pyro and the fireworks and everything. Paul's like, yeah, but I wrote it, so let me show you how it's really done, Axel.
Yeah, it's a very different thing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, Paul, it's an embarrassment of riches with him. He's got such an incredible canon of music, as you said, all of his solo career, which he's still, very productive. He's got a new record coming out in December.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It just came up all of a sudden. He texted me one day, says, "Hey, Brian, I'm going to do his accent here."
Please do.
No, I'm not going to do that. That's all you get, 2 words. But he said, I've been in lockdown here in the studio at home in England, and one thing led to another. I've got a new solo album. I'm putting it out soon. Cheers. Love you, man. It's just like, wow. And I just come away from that text stream going like, and I answered, I've got new stuff too. Like, well, I'm not Paul. But anyway, I come off of the stream and I just say like, God bless him. He's 79 now.
Wow.
Or he's going to be 79. I don't know. Whatever he is.
Yeah.
It's remarkable that he still has so much passion for music, and that he's creating fresh new music, and that he's inspired every day to start writing a song. He's one of those guys, unlike me, who's always in process, whether it's writing, recording, or mixing. He's always at it, always, 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 always.
Yeah, no, and hearing that, just sort of like, oh yeah, there's going to be a new Paul McCartney album. You just so many during, as these months have gone on and people have been sort of, staying inside more and more, it's like, before you knew it, like things that you didn't hear about at the beginning of the year, it's like, oh, there's a new Bruce Springsteen album, there's a new AC/DC album, and it's just like, yeah, because why not? Nobody's touring. I mean, you have scant concerts here and there in some places where, it's deemed safe, and you'll hear about large outdoor, not large, but you'll hear about bands that will play in some places. Like I've talked to people who've played in places like Colorado where, it's wide open and all that. But in general, everybody's home. So you might as well try to make something out of it, and it's like either I could record a new album or I could take up crochet or something,
or a cult.
Yeah,
but anyway,
it's the time to start a cult. That's true.
Or join one. Start.
Yeah, that's true. It's a little easier.
I think that it's more lucrative to start one than join one.
Right, exactly.
It costs a lot to join a cult. It's much better to. Anyway, it's amazing, and to me, like, I think this AC/DC record is going to be crazy. It's going to be huge with the golden lineup back together, with Brian singing and with Cliff on bass and Phil back on drums. That's bananas. And then the new Bruce Springsteen record with the E Street Band is nuts. Have you seen that documentary?
I haven't seen the documentary. I have had the album for, I guess it's about a month now, and I've listened to it a lot, but I do want to watch that. I have an iPhone, so I know I have Apple TV Plus for free. I just have to sign into it and find it. But I've heard that the documentary is great. I mean, I know the album's great, and he did a great like solo album just last year. Yeah. And so when I heard he was going to do another record, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. He's home. He might as well have done a solo album. But it's like, no, it's with the E Street Band. So,
it's tremendous. I mean, you see this thing with the E Street Band, much like AC/DC, where, there is no faking. There is no substitute for decades together. What that does for your trust system, like we were talking about with Paul, what that does for your comfort in playing with each other and knowing each other, knowing the strengths of each person and how to bring out those strengths, it's remarkable. So do check out that doc.
Oh no, I definitely will. And since we're talking about the E Street Band, I know that someone who has been a very vocal supporter of yours is little Steven Van Zandt, of course. He has that underground garage channel on Sirius XM, and I believe the notes tell me that 6 of your recent songs have been, quote, the coolest song in the world on that channel at different times. So you have 6 of the coolest songs in the world. Talk about, first of all, getting that, that nickname for the songs, but also, having somebody like Steven be so supportive.
Yeah, it's bananas. I mean, so I met Steven a long time ago backstage after a show, with Paul. And he, I had solo records out since 2005. Well, this guy has heard everything and knows everything. And he comes up to me like, like a guitar fan at a music shop. I mean, he's like, well, what kind of guitar are you using on that? Like he was so into it. I'm going like, damn. And he's so cool and he's so accessible, very bright. And as you know, if you've heard him, and many of us had on his great radio station or anywhere else, he's a real musicologist. He loves music and he has great taste. And so that when many years ago, I had a band called the Bayonets, and we were just going to go about releasing a series of singles with no great big goal, just to do it for fun and for free. This is my buddy Oliver Lieber, who happens to be the son of the great Jerry Lieber of Lieber and Stoller, who basically wrote the foundation of rock and roll. They wrote Hound Dog and Under the Boardwalk and so many great songs, Yakety Yak, Jailhouse Rock. They just did so many great songs. Anyway, Oliver and I wrote a series of songs. The first one was going to be released on Valentine's Day. I think this was back in 2013. And I released we did a fun video for it, which is hilarious. And we put out the video and the song on Valentine's Day, just to whoever would like it. You know, we didn't have a label or anything. And I get a direct message from Maureen Van Zant, who I don't think I'd even met yet, saying, "Hey, Brian, I've just played this song for Steven and he's bananas over it. Can I get your email? He wants to email you tomorrow."
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, great. So, you know, February 15th, the next day, I get an email from Steven saying, "Who is this? What is this? Where can I get some more?
Wow.
Who's singing? What in the heck is the Bayonets? I'm going to play it on my radio. Do you mind if I do an edit? If you say no, it's okay. I'm going to play it anyway.
Wow.
Thank you, Steven." And it's like, and then I got off of that email just going like, oh, like I had that feeling of that when your life changes channels and something big happened. And that was the beginning of this relationship. And with the Bayonets, we had 7 coolest songs in the world.
Oh, okay.
And then when the Bayonets went on hiatus and Oliver got busy doing his stuff and I went on tour doing my stuff, well, we rode that album, the Bayonets, for over a year and a half. For over 2 years.
Wow.
We just kept putting out singles that they kept loving. And so all that time later, then Steven reached out to me and said, "I was wondering if you'd like to do a solo singles deal with Wicked Cool Records." And
wow.
I was like, oh, hell yeah, you know? And so that started in 2017. And here we are 10 songs later.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about, you know, some of those albums that have so many singles. I mean, you can isolate ones from obviously, you know, some of the biggest artists, but when you think about, you know, bands who have tremendous overall success, but then they have that one record, like a perfect example would be, I think it's 1987, In Excess have that record Kick. It has like 8 singles on it, and they were all like in the top 10. And around the same time, Def Leppard's Hysteria album, they have like 4 or 5 #1 singles, and it's like, you know, it's just like these bands are great as a whole, but sometimes you just have this album. It's like at the perfect moment, you have the perfect people working on it. So yeah, the idea of putting out singles for 2 years, it's like, well, if you like that, do you think you'll like this? You know, and then when you listen to albums that have all those great singles, usually the other songs that aren't singles, it's not like they're filler. Like, oh no, these are great songs too. You know, there were only so many singles you could put out at one time, you know?
Yeah, when you have a band like Def Leppard, like you said, or AC/DC on Back in Black, or you know, any number of other big records like that, you have a label supporting you. And the Def Leppard album didn't go bonkers when it first came out.
Right.
You know, it wasn't until I think it was the single called Animal, and it was way after the thing was used. I think it got picked up for something.
Yeah, I think Women was the first single, which is a song that they'll play now, but it didn't catch on like at all. Animal did, and obviously you could, I'm agreeing with you. I think Animal's the one that did well, but it wasn't until like all of a sudden when you have like a, you know, Pour Some Sugar on Me, you know, and
that went bananas. Then, you know, Love Bites.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like, it was so many great singles. Now I would love to hear that album remixed and remastered and dry it up about 30%, you know, get some of the 80s stuff, the sonic experience of that record. I would love that. I don't know if that's in the cards, but I mean, if it sounded more like High and Dry or Pyromania.
Wow, yeah, I agree with that.
With those songs, it would be bananas.
Yeah, you know, those are 2 albums that do sound very 80s, you know. I mean, the, you know, In Excess Kick has like, you know, Devil Inside, Need You Tonight, but those do feel a little bit more of the era. But so anyway, I mean, we could talk about other bands and other singles too, but I do want to talk about you have the other song out now, which is it's a Procol Harum cover, Whiskey Train, which obviously, you know, most people think of Procol Harum, myself included, you're going to think of Whiter Shade of Pale, but this is a great song. And I have to admit that I didn't really know the original, so I listened to it as well. And then I went back and listened to yours a couple more times. I'm not knocking Procol Harum, but I was just I just wanted to see what it sounded like, and because in my mind I'm like, I have to hear, is this is this a song that's sort of like Whiter Shade of Pale? And it isn't. So it makes me realize that I don't know that much about that band, but I do know that this is a great song. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about who you collaborated with and where this song came from. I mean, it's not like it's a staple of, classic rock, even like satellite radio classic rock, where, there's like that Deep Tracks channel. This is such a deep track that I don't think I've ever heard it on the Deep Tracks channel,
Yeah, well, thanks, man. It's so weird. Okay. So I was approached by a friend of mine, Carla Olson, who you hear is the doyenne who I
Sure.
asked to sing lead vocal on this version, my B-side of Whiskey Train, Wicked Cool Records. Yeah, she called me up and said, Brian, I'm doing an album and the theme is train songs. And would you like to do a duet with me? And I said, sure, what do you have in mind? And she said, well, here's a list of cool train songs that we love. And it was a great list. I mean, it was like the Byrds and Dylan, and it was
Sure.
like all the great stuff, but kind of an Americana vibe. And I said, all those are really great. Would you be open to trying something different? And I said, there's this song by Procol Harum called Whiskey Train. Because my head just went like, what songs are cool that have train in the title?
Yeah.
And she said, I've never heard it, but send it to me. And now flashback some many years ago, I used to play it in my high school band.
Oh, wow.
I had this cool high school band, very good, I thought at the time. I don't know what it would sound like if I heard them again now. And we did some of the hits of the time, album-oriented rock of the time, but we kind of focused more on, we didn't care if they were hits. We did what we wanted so we could do deep track stuff. And I love this song because it's just a real brutal, like badass guitar riff. And then the lyric comes in and it's like, it's kind of cool too. I mean, the lyric is as sweaty and nasty as the guitar lick. It's about a guy who's finally hit the end of the road with his drinking.
Oh,
and he's going to swear it off. And I thought, that's cool. I'm a sober dude. I've been sober for a very long time, thank God.
Yeah.
At 33 years.
Wow.
But anyway, I sent that to them and they said, oh, rockin', we love it. And I go, well, if it's okay, can you sing, Carla, can you sing in the original key? Can you sing these notes? And she goes, yeah, no problem. I have to warm up, but I'll do it. And she said, yeah, I'm in. I said, okay, so I'm going to start a track. So I did the track over here, did it all in a day. And then she came over here and sang it. I played, all that stuff, the guitar, fake drums, bass, keyboards, sang background, some percussion. And then we gave it to a drummer to play live drums on, a great drummer named Eric Eldenius, who plays with Billy Idol. And he's Swedish and East Indian with a mohawk. And he's a badass. So he played that great cowbell drum pattern.
Yeah.
And it's got more cowbell than even Christopher Walken could sing.
That's the funny thing that you mentioned, that my problem with the Procol Harum version, a little too much cowbell. I think, I listened to it with headphones on and I'm like, this year is all cowbell. I would like it just a little bit less. And yeah, I was actually thinking of Walken, that, he's got the fever and the only solution is more cowbell. I'm like, you know what? I could use a little bit less cowbell. Your version has the exact right amount of cowbell. So
thank you. But you know what? I'll tell you why it is. I think that their version has too much cowbell. Okay. For you recording nerds out here, I'm going to tell you what happened. You listen to the record first, listen to theirs, listen to ours. You will hear lots of cowbell, more than you'll need for another year. Now, what happened is, their great drummer, B.J. Wilson, remarkable drummer. He's like a lead drummer. He plays mostly fills. He'll play a beat when he has to, but it's mostly like, he's a lead drummer. Anyway, on that recording, he kept a groove through the whole thing. But the groove called for playing the cowbell part with his right hand instead of a cymbal or a hi-hat. So the whole thing is dun, 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 through the whole thing. Now the mics around a drum kit hear a cowbell 3 times as loud as a cymbal.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the engineer just basically couldn't control it.
Yeah.
When it came time for us to do ours, we had to noodle around with it because we had the same problem. So we had to fill in the snare drum, turn the snare mics off, and fill the snare mics with a sample of a snare so that we could get it just right. Yeah, it took a lot of work.
Well, and look, the attention to detail is important because you want cowbell to be a good thing in your life. You don't want the cowbell to send you running for a different song. So Whiskey Train, and also got a new thing. I guess people can find those both at brianray.com, and I'm sure they're available all the other places, but that always seems like the best place to start. You go to brianray.com. And I want to ask you about 2 more collaborations. And I appreciate you being so generous with your time. It's been fantastic talking to you. I was reading that you did a version of the song One Heartbeat with Smokey Robinson. And I guess you actually wrote the song, which he originally did in the 80s. So I wanted to kind of talk about writing the song. Do you write it with him in mind, or do you write the song? And how does that work? And then how it all comes full circle where you actually do a version of it with Smokey, who, by the way, still sounds exactly like Smokey the way you want him to sound. I think that was a couple years ago. And I was just like, when's this song from? Because Smokey sounds fantastic. Not that you didn't sound great, but I'm just, just Smokey's been around for a little while, and I love to hear that he still sounds great.
Yeah, right. That's living right. He lived right. He takes great care of himself. He's a very healthy guy. He golfs all the time, and he's just a really positive, amazing guy. Yeah. So 30 years ago, I was lucky enough to write a hit song for him. It was the title of his album, One Heartbeat. It was the second single from that album, and it was a smash on 3 formats. And, it was like another level of success I hadn't ever dreamed of before. I mean, first of all, the Beatles covered Smokey Robinson, and the Stones covered Smokey Robinson, and everyone else in the world covered Smokey Robinson. And he's a god to all of us. He's like the Paul McCartney of R&B, really. Think about it. Writer, singer, arranger, player, and executive. So he's all of those things like a Paul or like a Willie Dixon was to the blues. Anyway, so Smokey, he's doing a new album. This is before I have ever met him. He's doing a new album, and some friends of mine are producing it. And I called my friends thinking, well, it's worth asking, could we submit a song? My songwriting partner, Steve Legassic, and I, could we submit a song to Smokey? And they said, no, don't bother, man. He's got 1 billion songs, and they're all great. We can't even use them all. So thank you very much, but no. And I got off the phone all discouraged, and I turned to my partner, Steve. I said, they don't want it. They don't want to hear from us. Now, all I had then was a title and a beat. The song wasn't even done.
Yeah.
And Steven turned to me and he said, let's do it anyway. And I went, you're a genius. That's awesome. And we set about writing the song. It took us 2 weeks to write it and record it. Did a really nice little demo of it. And on our way out of town, we were going to go visit his folks. Steve and I dropped by the producer's office and handed them a cassette.
Nice.
Hand labeled cassette of One Heartbeat, and said, I know you said no, but we wrote one anyway, just for Smokey. So to answer your question, it was written just for Smokey. We imagined,
I love that. Yeah.
What would we like to hear from Smokey? So we handed him the cassette, left town, went up to Yosemite, came back on a Sunday night, and there's a message on our voicemail saying, Brian, this is Rick and Peter. We love that song. We played it for Smokey. He loves that song. We want to do it just like your demo. Bring all your gear. We're going to be at Conway Studios Thursday, 32-track digital. See you there. And that was it.
Oh, that's great.
And so all these years later, now, I have this singles deal with Little Steven, and I asked him after my first single, what would you like me to try next? We had nice first success. And they go, well, what about like a garage soul song? And so I'm like flipping through my mind and go like, well, soul, me, one heartbeat. And then I think about the song, and it's a slow jam, and it's like a really mellow, like, yeah, it's a slow jam. That is not garage. But I thought, well, besides the record, there's a song in there. Let me just see. And so I just decided, what if I put a double up the bap, bap, boom, bap, boom, bap, boom, bap. And then I had my songwriting partner, Steve, come over here, and he said, what about an intro? He loved the idea of doing a garage version, because of course we never did. Steve sits down and goes, da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da. And I went, genius again, Steven. And that was it, man. We were off to the races. And then I called Smokey and said, hey, man, I did a version of our old song. Would you want to come and sing a little something? He goes, yeah, man, sure, no problem. I'd love that. That's my Smokey impression.
That's a great Smokey.
Yeah. And we got a studio in town, and he came over. And then I said, oh, I also did The Tears of a Clown too. And he goes, oh yeah, let me hear that. And he goes, damn, who's that playing that bass? He goes, that's like the new James Jameson, who was the great bass player from all the Motown records. And I explained that was Davey Farragher from Elvis Costello's band. And he says, damn. And he said, yeah, okay, so what do you want? I said, well, hey, I mean, we're not the Righteous Brothers. We're not Sam and Dave. We ain't singing to the same girl together. Whatever you feel like, some ad libs or some harmonies or whatever. And he goes, okay, great. You want me to sing the second verse then? And I go, yeah,
that's great.
And he says, okay, man, let me just go out there. We had it all set up and the mic set up, and he'd already done one heartbeat. And yeah, he just killed it.
Oh, that's great.
Sang like 5 takes, and we comped together our favorite stuff. And there he is singing half of The Tears of a Clown.
As a service to people watching us on YouTube, because I'm here in my garage, the back room of my garage, I literally had at arm's length a box of cassettes. So when you're talking about a cassette, that's what this is, in case anybody doesn't, never saw one before. It may not have had the best sound, but it was the first medium that I started buying records or albums on. So when I was a kid, I had boxes and boxes of cassettes, and it's nice to see that it was very practical, because you could just hand it to someone. Now it'd be like, oh, I'll email you a link, but you know what? They might never listen to that link. But if you get handed a cassette or a CD a few years later, that goes a long way. The last thing I want to ask you about is the Bayonets did a song called Vagabond Soul that featured Steven Tyler, who everybody knows what a great singer Steven Tyler is. I don't need to say that out loud. He's also a tremendous harmonica player. I know they have that song, A Permanent Vacation, Hangman's Jury. That is not the only time that he plays harmonica. It's the first time I noticed it. They did an MTV Unplugged where he played harmonica on it. So I know on your song, of course he sings, but he also plays harmonica. Talk about how that comes about, working with Steven Tyler.
Yeah, right. So I had written a song, Vagabond Soul, most of it in a hotel on a day off in London while out there with Paul. And I remember sending a little sort of digital track of just me playing the song to my then songwriting partner, Oliver Lieber, to consider for another Bayonet song. And he goes, oh, this is great. Yeah, let's do it. So I came back to town. We finished the song together. We finished the lyric together. We loved how it turned off. And Oliver turns to me. It's always the partners. Oliver turned to me and goes like, you know Steven Tyler, don't you? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, what about asking him to come and sing on it? And I went, genius. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? It's like Smokey, it's like whatever. They could say no, and then you just go, oh, bummer.
Yeah.
And I waited for Steven to get back to me, and there was no reply. I thought, okay, well, that's a no.
Yeah, sure.
And I recognized I had the wrong number.
Oh.
I sent it to him again. This just copy and pasted the same message. And within 15 minutes, he was back. Are you kidding me? I'd do anything for you, man. I'm in. We're going to go in deep. When do you want to do it? And he shows up at the studio out in the valley, Oliver's studio, with a briefcase full of harmonicas, all warmed up and ready to sing. He sang like for 2 hours. He kept coming up with new ideas. Run it by again. Let me do this harmony thing. Okay, let me do this. Let me try that. And then, how about harmonica solo? And he played a killer harmonica solo. So he's just ridiculous. I mean, crazy talent and crazy energy.
Yeah, I mean, I really only know what I've seen on stage or videos, and obviously in interviews we know what a character he is. So I can only imagine that experience. Being in studio with him for 2 hours. That would probably have been maybe not as informative as the Bruce Springsteen documentary you're talking about, but just watching him, kind of think out loud, when you watch somebody who's that good at it, I mean, I've worked with comedians. I've worked for a long time with the comedian Dennis Miller, and he'll think about a joke. He changes one word and you're like, well, what was all that for? And then you hear him say it and you're like, oh yeah, that one word made all the difference. So, when somebody's really good at what they do, they're like, no, I shouldn't sing that part like this. I should go a little bit more like that. And you're like, I mean, whatever you say, Steven Tyler. And then you hear it and you go like, oh yeah, he was right. He's 100% right.
Amazing. Yeah, you're so right. It's fun to watch masters at work. Paul's the same way. Smokey the same way. Smokey's the master of the one word. I mean, he'll make the word the stand out in a way that you never imagined. Well, the same was true in this case. It's just like master, just a master. Yeah.
Well, Brian, again, it has been so much fun to just talk to you about your music, but just music in general. When I clicked on the link and started talking to you, I didn't think we would name check 3 albums from 1987: Permanent Vacation, Hysteria, and Kick. But there they are, and that's all in the sweet spot. All albums that I owned on cassette, by the way. Yeah. But BrianRay.com, Whiskey Train. And I want to get the title of the other one right. I know I have most of the words in my head. Got a New Thing. I would have I think I would have put them in the wrong order. Got a New Thing, Whiskey Train, BrianRay.com. Brian, thank you so much. Best of luck with these songs. And I love that, when you have something new, I'll probably hear it on Little Steven's channel, so, but thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much. Great talking to you, Christian.